Hello VASCAM, my name is Christopher Vu, a contemporary classical composer for concert hall and stage based in Boston, Massachusetts. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California in a little town called Redondo Beach. I very much grew up in the beach bum lifestyle. I grew up surfing, I played water polo even throughout college. I was tan, my hair was orange, bleached from salt water and chlorine. But music was always the love of my life. My love and exposure to music came from my mother, a concert pianist who studied at the Conservatory of Ho Chi Minh City since she was a little girl until she received her college degree in piano performance. The immigrant experience in America and also becoming a mother forced my mom to give up a performing career and to go into teaching, but it didn't stop her from filling my life full of music. I remember watching her play the Pathetique Sonata or Chopin Scherzo and being in total awe as a young boy. The piano was the coolest thing I've ever seen at that age. So I was never forced to play piano. I just wanted to be like my mom. My mom taught me piano herself, which many other musician parents would say is a miracle. Something about the parent-child dynamic some say is impossible. However, learning piano from my mom is one of my fondest memories. I progressed quickly. Our lessons were both productive musically, but also a time I got to hang out with my mom, where I got to laugh or complain about my life as a young growing boy. I'm definitely a mama's boy, and I consider my mom one of my best friends. And now, she's a champion of my music sometimes, playing the piano when I need her to. During my teenage years, my mom and I discovered that I had a talent in improvising. I was always improvising on the classical pieces my mother was teaching me. She thought it was impressive, but said I shouldn't disrespect the composer like that. That's when I discovered the world of jazz, listening to Oscar Peterson, Bill Evans, Art Tatum, Herbie Hancock, Chick Corea, Thelonious Monk, and became obsessed with the medium and found my outlet to improvise. I went to Boston College to study chemistry, but I never stopped playing music. I was always playing gigs in the city, whether it was jazz gigs or with my pop rock funk band named Juice. I have memories of coming home at midnight, 2 a.m. after a gig, and then having to do organic chemistry homework or writing a lab report half asleep. My musical life took a pivot when I met composer and professor Thomas Obo Lee at BC. He was a former jazz musician who became a classical composer, which intrigued me as a jazz musician. He taught me that the intuition to improvise can be the same intuition to compose. How improvising is spontaneous composition or composition is written down improvisation. He showed me how I can express my individual voice and my diverse musical influences through the medium of contemporary classical music. I started taking private lessons with him where I wrote copious amount of music, string quartets, percussion quartet, solos, duos, Pierrot ensemble, chamber orchestra. Although I already had a robust life in performing, I fell in love with composition. I had the opportunity to continue my studies at the New England Conservatory, where I completed my master's in composition. And composing has been my bliss ever since. My compositions are rooted in my life and history as a performer, and thus is a reflection of, and perhaps even limited by, my musicianship. It's why it's a virtue of mine to try to find time to always practice, learn, and improve my musicianship. It will be a lifelong pursuit, and I always want to challenge myself. One takeaway from this is that I will not write music that I cannot play or can coach and show another player. I'm not saying that my music is always simple. It can be very complex. But in other words, I won't write complex music for complexity's sake. Also, as a performer, I have a very corporeal experience with music, experiencing music through my body. Performing is a very physical activity, relying on muscle memory, intuition, but I also feel a physicality to music by simply reacting to it, listening to it. Certain harmonies or sounds will cause me to make involuntary noises, like ooh, ah. Perhaps goosebumps, chills, hair standing on its end. My body is almost a barometer of what music I like and what music I will write. With my limited time, I would like to perhaps focus my talk on one aspect of my music, and it's about how I approach rhythm in my music. As a performer, I loved rhythmically intense music. I love a good groove and feeling out and parsing out complex rhythms until it feels natural to me. One of my musical heroes is Chick Corea, a jazz pianist and composer. And one of my favorite quotes of his is that he called his 10 fingers his 10 little drummers. I couldn't relate to it more. Holy Mess is a chamber music piece for a quartet consisting of clarinet, violin, cello, and piano. The excerpt I will share is based on a groove that I came up with by improvising, singing aloud. It's admittedly a very syncopated and complex rhythm, but it's a rhythm that comes very natural to me as a jazz musician. It goes bum 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 ba bum 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 ba bum 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 ba bum 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 ba bum. I've had great success teaching that rhythm to other jazz players. They can pick it up by ear, no problem. But it's a rhythm that isn't very easy for many classically trained players. It's not that they can't play it, but it's because classical players rely on reading the music that's in front of them. And this rhythm isn't the most easy to digest on paper. And there are arguably many ways to write this rhythm. And the right way, in my opinion, is subjective. Here are 4 ways that I've written out the rhythm. And even though they all look drastically different, they're all exactly the same. The top rhythm is how I hear it in my head. It's simply, well, not really simply, but it's an 11-beat groove that just cycles over and over again. The problem is when you reach this part of the groove, when the syncopation starts, as a musician reading this, it's hard to process what's happening here in the moment. Musicians tend to start falling behind as they try to process what they're looking at. It's not obvious that it's a syncopation. And then when you have a group of musicians trying to play together, things start falling out of line and out of sync. If you compare this to the 4th rhythm, I've really broken up the groove into various meters. Like it's very micromanaged with each note. But classical players I found, and the one I've consulted with, prefer reading it like this for them to see how everything's happening. So how they count it is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. By reading it like that, they're on top of every rhythmic change and they can stay tight, but it seems very anxiety inducing to count that fast. And I want it just to be a groove like dun 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 dun, not 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So as a composer, I had to find a compromise in how I divide up the groove and how I beam the notes to where I can convey what I want musically, but also have it be readable and easy to coach with the musicians. So, Holy Mess is an example of me relying on my musicianship and intuition to develop rhythm. This next piece, a solo piano piece called For Pinto, is an example of me developing rhythm through mathematical formulas. I've always had a quantitative mind, which is perhaps hinted by how I studied chemistry in college. And I love being able to bring it into my compositional process. What I did was I started by splitting out a matrix of numbers, a sieve method based on 7 and 5. I then used this operation to filter out these numbers to come up with these series of numbers. I then analyzed these numbers and extracted the distance between each number, resulting in these numbers. Now, with these sets of numbers, right now they don't mean anything, but I decided to make these numbers dictate how many quarter notes would appear in every other measure of my piece. A 1 would look like this, a 2 would look like this, and a 3 would look like this. So if you look at the beginning of my piece, so my first series of numbers is 1, 2, and 2, and here you see how I follow that faithfully, and I did that throughout the entire piece. The result is a rhythm that appears sporadic and jilted, which is the desired effect I was going for. But I didn't completely give up my musical intuition. By giving the rhythm a rigid structure dictated by this numeric series, it allowed the other aspects of the music, like musical pitches, harmony, the narrative arc of the piece, to be dictated by my musical intuition. By limiting myself in one aspect, it forced me to be creative in others. It's a creative challenge that many artists have imposed on themselves across all artistic disciplines. I'm by no means the first person to do something like this using math and algorithms and mathematical formulas to compose. American composer Milton Babbitt and Greek composer Ioannis Xenakis have their own version of this, and they've had operations to dictate not just rhythm, but pitch, harmony, timbre. For me, I use it to give my musical intuition a new context, a new foundation to bounce off of. The next piece is titled And It Passes, and it's composed for flute, viola, and harp, also known as the Debussy Trio, named after the French composer who first wrote for this gorgeous combination of instruments. In regards to rhythm, I used a similar method as the solo piano piece earlier, calculating out a series of numbers, but I have it to express a very different musical effect. Instead of a piece with rhythmic vitality like the last piece, I wanted a piece that felt like it was floating, almost no semblance of a pulse. Tones and colors would just appear in the aural space. I wanted a piece of music that almost stood between the categories of music and a painting. I just wanted to convey a musical hue. Morton Feldman is one of my favorite composers, and his music was heavily influenced by the abstract expressionist painters. One of his biggest influence was Mark Rothko, and in his words, he saw Rothko's music that it didn't need the rhythmic vitality of a Jackson Pollock painting to be kept alive, but instead it exists as a strange, vast, monolithic sundial with the exterior world reflecting upon it, still another meaning, another breathing. If we can imagine a line that represents the passage of time, the series of numbers I came up with represent different positions in time where an action occurs. Each player has their own series of numbers, and each player's timeline have different units of time. For example, the flute player is in units of half notes, which are 2 beats. The viola player is in units of a dotted eighth note, which could be seen as 0.75 of a beat, and the harp is in units of whole notes, which is 4 beats. The result is a seemingly random series of musical events on the surface, but underneath there's a construction. And also, like the piano piece, all other aspects of the composition like pitch, harmony, and timbre were dictated by my own musical intuition. The piece is much longer than that, but I figured I'd cut it short as we're ending the end of our talk. Thank you for listening. It's been a pleasure to talk about my music. I didn't get a chance to talk about other aspects of my musical life, like my work with my group Pinwheel, which is a multidisciplinary group of theater artists and musicians who create original works for puppetry and shadow puppetry, and also my other work in electroacoustic music. Well, if you want to learn more about me and more of my music, you can visit my website at www.chrisvuemusic.com, or you can reach out to me personally, and I'd love to talk and hang out and share more. But thank you for listening, and I hope everyone has a great day.